These are the KTT Roses, a great value switch in KTT's budget lineup. And these are the KTT Strawberries, another great value switch in KTT's more high-end lineup. Today I want to do a little review of these KTT Strawberries, as well as some comparisons between them and KTT Roses, as they're pretty similar. If you're interested in the KTT Roses, I have a whole review on them, which will be linked in the description. But with that, let's get into the video. Here's a small graph showing the materials and specs of each switch. I won't bore you with all that talk, so you can just pause here if you'd like to. Alright, so really quickly, let's run down the tolerances of these switches. I'm going to be comparing them to just alpacas and KTT Roses, as they're pretty too standard, the switches, and KTT Roses are also pretty similar. I'd say in order that the alpacas are better than the strawberries, and the strawberries are better than the roses. None of them are going to cause any issues while typing. You're not really going to notice it, but it's something that I guess I'd mention anyways if anyone's just curious. On Dankkeeb's website, they state that it's recommended to lube and film these, but for me, these really didn't need films. In fact, these didn't even need lube, and honestly, I'd simply recommend not lubing these switches at all. Not just because they're great stock, which they are, but you don't understand the pain I went through trying to lube these. These things are so tight. I just gave up lubing on these because it took me like an hour or 2 hours just to open these up, and then all I did was spag lube the springs, and then I had to close them back up, and that was like another hour. And it didn't help that I had my cat just staring at me the entire time. It's not really something I've experienced with any other switches, so I mean, I guess that's not too great. Just to get it out of the way though, there is a high chance that it's just an issue with my bat, and these will benefit from lubing, though in my opinion and in my experience so far, I don't really think it's worth it, especially since they're so great stock. So great, in fact, that I honestly prefer them in my VAS 60 round 2 over my Lube KTT Roses, and also like my KTT Roses more than my Lube and filmed alpacas and ink V2s, so that really does say a lot. These have like no spring ping, no leaf noise, just about no scratch, while having a pretty nice spring weight overall. They honestly feel just as smooth or smoother than a lube switch. No, maybe they don't have that super creamy, for lack of a better word, sound and feel like a lube switch, though they're nice and smooth. It's just like a frictionless press all the way down. Maybe there's a tiny bit of scratch that can be fixed by lubing, and you do hear a bit of scratch, but honestly I don't really mind it at all, since these stock are literally smooth in my KTT Roses, and you can barely notice the audible scratch from a normal typing distance. Before the sound test, there's one final thing I want to note about these. There's slight inconsistencies, not in smoothness like for example the Cat on Black ink V2s, but actually in the bottom out feel and sound. About 3 to 5 out of my 70 switches that I got from Dankkeeb's either had a soft or mushy feeling bottom out and had a considerably larger amount of audible scratch than the rest, while also feeling tighter, which is pretty odd. But alright, so now let's get into the sound test. This board I'm using is the VAS 60 round 2 by Dankkeeb's, and only using the included plate and case foam. I'm also using these Gateron Ink V2 stabilizers, which are literally the best stabs I've ever tried. Okay, here's the sound test. Alright, so I want to give my final thoughts on these switches, and just compare them to the KTT Roses. Both of these stock are just incredible, like really good. If you're on a budget and maybe don't want to do much work with your switches, these are great to use stock, as they're super smooth, no spring ping on either one of them, and no leaf noise whatsoever. The sound profile is slightly different, even stock, but that's just something that you have to judge by yourself. Like, that's just a preference thing. Something I do want to note about the KTT Roses, which I couldn't really note in my review as it happened later after I uploaded the video, is these have a slight ticking. It's not as noticeable and annoying as the Durox Sunflower palm switches that I have, that I also made a review on. Personally, I still really like the sound and would still definitely recommend these, as it might not even be something you notice that much. It's a really minor thing, but so far, and I will update on this in a pinned comment if it ever happens, but the Strawberries do not have this at all. Even without films, which I didn't really use films on these, probably should have mentioned that earlier. But yeah, so the KTT Roses are 27 cents a switch, and the Strawberries are 40 cents a switch. They're both pretty competitive compared to the competition. I already prefer the KTT Roses over my Alpacas, which are 55 cents a switch, and these are only better than KTT Roses, so I can't really say they're bad value. Maybe they're not, in comparison to KTT Roses and the value they have, maybe not as much of a bang for the buck as those. That's just kind of how things work, just diminishing returns. The more you pay, the less you're gonna get for the price. And if you're willing to spend a little bit more while not trying to spend too much, then these are great, and I would definitely recommend them, especially if you want a stock switch.